going to get rolling on another one of the wars that we're dealing with in our 20th century topic of wars and their causes and effects. And we're going to start with the first Indochina War. Now, when we talk about the Vietnam War, we want to understand that there's actually two wars that go into this conflict. We're going to start in 1945 with a war between many Vietnamese fighters and the French, which is known as the First Indochina War, 1945 to 1954. And then after a few more years, we're going to see the Second Indochina War, or what we call here in the United States, the Vietnam War, from the early 1960s until 1973. In Vietnam, of course, they've got different names for each of these wars. They'll call them the French War and the American War. So we're going to start off with that first Indochina War, 1945 to 1954. I'm going to start with talking about the long-term causes of this, and we want to recognize that Indochina, and Vietnam included, have long been in the hands of the French as a colonial holding, and this is since the late 1800s. And all during that time, the French and their exploitative rule over the Vietnamese led to a number of nationalist groups that have opposed French control in Vietnam. After World War I, Ho Chi Minh, we're going to talk about him as an important nationalist leader of the Vietnamese, is actually going to make a plea, make an attempt to get to the Paris Peace Conference and make a plea for the independence and self-determination of the Vietnamese people. And he's going to be rebuffed. French attempts at westernizing and trying to turn Vietnam into a Catholic nation is actually going to create more animosity from Vietnamese nationalists who just want independence. And this is exacerbated by really a harsh control that Vietnam is suffering under the French rule, where Vietnamese resources are simply being exploited by the French with very little benefit making it to the Vietnamese people themselves. As we get closer to the outbreak of this war, we want to talk about the Second World War and how in 1941, while the French are controlling Vietnam, at this point it's going to be that Vichy French regime after the Nazis conquered France. The Vichy French regime is in Southeast Asia, and at that point, the Japanese are going to come in and establish a foothold in Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, at that point, begins to lead a fight against first the French and then the Japanese occupiers. And throughout the course of the Second World War, these Viet Minh fighters, this is the name, it's a shortened for the League for the Independence of Vietnam. It's a nationalist fighting group. Is going to fight a guerrilla war against the Japanese with support from American equipment coming from the outside, because we're fighting the Japanese as well, and we're looking for any allies that we could possibly find. Japan is going to retreat prior to the French removal of their control. And so Ho Chi Minh is going to use this as an opportunity to declare independence for Vietnam. And I strongly encourage you to get into the 1945 Declaration of Independence for the nation of Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh very purposefully is going to use the language of the American Declaration of Independence and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen to make a plea for the same enlightened ideas that led to our country's independence from England and the end of the French monarchy to the Vietnamese people. And in fact, he structures his Declaration of Independence in very much the same way that Thomas Jefferson structured the American Declaration of Independence, with a statement of principles, a train of grievances, how the French have wronged the Vietnamese, and then, of course, the Declaration. The French are going to refuse any semblance of autonomy for the Vietnamese, and violence between the Viet Minh and the French will grow into war by December of 1945. Now, Vietnam and the Viet Minh are being led by Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was a communist. After the Western powers at the Paris Peace Conference refused to listen to Vietnam's plea for independence, Ho Chi Minh was disillusioned with the Western capitalist states, and that pushed him towards Marxism and Leninism. And so he was a communist, But in Vietnam, his primary role is as a nationalist attempting to rid Vietnam of foreign occupiers. But remember that after World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union are immediately going to move into this Cold War situation where everything about the spread of communism for the United States is being seen in the lens of a Cold War conflict and the expansion of the Soviet Union. So the United States is going to ignore Vietnam's declaration of independence as the US wanted France to regain its pre war status, to defend, to help the United States to defend Europe against the spread of communism there. And stripping France of its empire might have harmed that quest. So the fighters in this first Indochina War, we've got the Viet Minh. Now the Viet Minh are going to be divided into different groups, from smaller local groups to regional to larger regular forces, which are going to allow both small scale guerrilla attacks, ambushes, booby traps against the French, all the way up to larger, more organized operations with thousands of troops involved. Early in the war, the Viet Minh are going to only be equipped with small arms left over from the Second World War. But after 1950, more arms shipments will arrive from the now communist Chinese nation, as they will support a communist nationalist fight in their south. China will also provide some officers who are experienced after years of guerrilla combat in their own Chinese Civil War and their war against the Japanese. So China will provide officers of the People's Liberation Army in China to help organize Viet Minh fighters against the French. Now, the French are dealing with a lot of political instability after the Second World War, and that's going to make this conflict in Vietnam very difficult to wage. Also, the French are responsible for occupying a part of the three-powered occupation of Western Germany after World War II, and that's going to take a lot of toll on the French military. Finally, French conscripted forces, French draftees, were by French law not permitted to go fight in the colonies, so they were limited to volunteers in the army and the French Foreign Legion, and that would be French soldiers made up from regions of the French Empire. Also, some local Vietnamese allies that opposed the Viet Minh and the communists would join in with the French. French equipment was also somewhat limited before 1950, but certainly better off than what the Viet Minh had. But in 1950, the United States begins to see this story in Vietnam being a part of the bigger Cold War story. So the US will start to fund, and actually we're going to become the primary funder of the French war in Vietnam. Now, despite these advantages in technology and equipment, Vietnamese topography, the mountains, the jungles are going to make French mobility quite limited, though they will enjoy air superiority that will provide some advantage during the war, but certainly not enough to bring victory. Now, when it comes to strategy, the French, having the better equipped army, are hoping to draw the Viet Minh into one major engagement that can break the back of their enemy and bring a quick end to the war. The French do not want to see this turn into a long-lasting war of attrition, because that is a really hard thing to do when you are fighting thousands of miles from your home. The French are going to pay no attention to administrative reforms in the country of Vietnam that might have gained them some popular support from the Vietnamese people. On the other hand, the Viet Minh are preparing for a long, protracted fight, and they're willing to give many more lives in this quest for victory. This is seen by the Viet Minh as an existential crisis. If the French army loses, they go back home. If the Viet Minh lose, they don't get a nation. And so this becomes a fight that they are very willing to lose tremendous numbers. The Viet Minh military commander, his name is Vo Nguyen Giap. He is going to see a victory in this war coming both through military means and non-military factors, trying to gain the support of the people, particularly the peasants of Vietnam. And some of this is going to be done through propaganda created through offices, communist offices in North Vietnam, and then sometimes through intimidation and threats and violence against peasants that might not support the Viet Minh. Um, this is stressing throughout communist ideology and a nationalist ideology to drive out foreign invaders. And this is going to create a more unified force for the Viet Minh. So the war is long. It starts in 1945 and is going to last all the way until 1954. Early French operations to get that major victory are never going to amount to anything, while they continue to deal with smaller Viet Minh attacks using guerrilla warfare techniques. After 1950, as more weapons are going to pour into this war, from the Chinese to the Vietnamese, to the Viet Minh, and from the Americans into the French, larger battles will occur with neither side gaining the upper hand, as superior Viet Minh numbers will be balanced against the superior French firepower and some air support from above. By 1954, the war has gone on for nearly 10 years, and peace talks are on the horizon to bring this conflict to an end. And this is where the Viet Minh are pushing for one decisive military victory that could possibly help their negotiations be more favorable at the table. And this is going to come in March of 1954, where the Viet Minh will attack an outpost in northwest Vietnam, where the French had an outpost, a base of operations that could only be resupplied through airdrops. This is called Dien Bien Phu. The French were unable to resupply the fort and to remove their wounded. And by March 7th, 1954, the French will surrender. And this ends up being the greatest victory for the Viet Minh over the French during this war. And it gives them some of those advantages in negotiations that they're looking for. The effects of the war, tremendous losses on both sides. 80,000 Frenchmen killed, over 200,000 wounded. For the Viet Minh, over 300,000 Viet Minh will be killed. Again, they were willing to put many more lives on the line than the French were willing or able to do. But Ho Chi Minh does have a stronger position at the negotiation tables in Geneva, though he will not ultimately get full independence for Vietnam. What happens is a division in Vietnam, a temporary division. But remember, temporary divisions during the Cold War often turn into permanent divisions. So Vietnam will be divided at the 17th parallel. And the northern portion of Vietnam will be led by Ho Chi Minh and will form its communist government under his leadership, while the southern part of Vietnam will still have French influence, but be led by a pro-West Vietnamese president named No Dinh Diem and an emperor, Bo Dai. Both are pro-West. Unifying elections to bring this country together were to be held within 2 years. But as we'll see in our next video, those elections are never going to happen, and this conflict will not come to an end. We'll see you next time.